All right, guys, welcome to a home office version of Office Hours here today. Welcoming you guys into my home office here. Today, we are going to talk all about how to approach your off season and how to not completely fall off the wagon. Every year around springtime, maybe even early summer, I have somebody that reaches out to me and says, "Man, I completely fell off the wagon. I was doing so well last year, and then I came into the off season and I just kind of hung up my shoes or put my bike on the rack and never did anything. Maybe skied a few times, but really kind of just saddled things up." And I think when we talk about the off season, I think it's really, really good for us to start with really what does it mean? Um, the off season is I think a little bit misnamed. You're not taking the time completely off. It's not like you're hanging up your shoes or anything, and not going outside, not seeking adventure. I think the number one thing athletes need to do, and the reason why I believe that coaching has so much value in your off season is most people know how to train hard. You guys can all put your heads down, right to the grindstone and work, and put the hours in. Where most people actually struggle is how to take the time off, how to rest, how to recover, but how to seek balance within that. If we say we're finding balance by fitting in our workouts in around our life, it's kind of the same thing for your off season. You still need to fit those workouts in. You still need to keep some level of fitness, especially if you have goals. Coming into the rest of your next season, so for 2021. Um, so looking at that, really defining a period of time when you're not going to put as much pressure on yourself, but still give yourself a few things to kind of consider and a few things to look at. And I think first and foremost is using a tool like Training Peaks is super helpful for us, especially as coaches. If your peak CTL, say, was an 80, um, find something that's reasonable for you to maintain in the off season. We don't want you to go all the way down to zero. We certainly don't want you to cut it in half and go all the way to 40. But what about 50? What about 60 for a CTL? If you're a newer athlete into this idea of CTL and things, it's really easy to say, well, why don't I just try to maintain this number and maintain this level of training um, all the way through the winter? Why is that a problem? And it's not inherently a problem to do that, depending on how low your training level is. Meaning, if you're doing and you just recently maxed out at, say, 20 to 24 miles a week, that's not too bad. Trying to keep that and maintain that, especially if you have longer distance goals coming your way in the spring. Let's say you just did your first 5K or 10K and you're looking at a half or a full marathon this next um, spring, you're really going to want to make sure that you maintain, that base level fitness. But if you're CTL and you've been training for long distance events, ultras, say, or even short distance work, half marathon to marathon work, keeping your mileage up into the 60s and 70s can be pretty tough. It's also going to be really, really tough on your body. So it's really important that you give your body a chance to rest. And I know a couple of times we've talked about periodization and the idea that we're trying to build a bigger bucket. But the bigger part here is understanding that you're going to have to, at some point, give your body a chance to rest, to actually absorb the training. Hard training and hard workouts are not just physically demanding, they're also mentally demanding. And if you're constantly putting your head to the grindstone and working, you're going to find yourself burn out, plain and simple. And so the idea of defining an off season for yourself is both to give yourself a mental and physical break. Um, but where most people fall off the wagon is when they've pushed too hard in the late part of their off in-season training. So leading up to a big marathon, they push themselves into some pretty tough corners, and then they just end up taking a whole bunch of time off afterwards. That's when things are really out of balance. So to prevent yourself from falling off the wagon, I've got a couple things I'll give to you. Number one is define some things that you want to accomplish in your off season. And these don't always have to be sports related goals. In talking with the athletes in our coaching group, we've got everything from people who love to go and explore and adventure in caves. We've got people that love to take up other parts of sports, right? They may take up more time swimming. They may take up more time in the weight room. They may take up more time cycling. But what could you be doing there that's going to help you move towards your goals that you have for spring? Could you say keep your CTL up by implementing more cycling into your training instead of running? So no impact sport, and it's a great way to hold on to your CTL. But it's also, if you live somewhere that you can cycle during this winter time, it's perfect. If you live in a much colder climate, learn how to ski. I can't tell you guys how advantageous it is to be able to skate ski, cross country ski. It's a phenomenal low impact aerobic sport. If you're really itching, it's a great way to get in some fun competition as well if you're just trying to have fun with it. Don't give yourself another season to train for because then you're never really going to have time off. Use it as a way, instead of going for a run that day, go for a nice skate ski or cross country ski. Um, I do have some questions in the group that I will get to, but one of the big things that I really want athletes to walk away with is that your off season is your time to take up more time on the couch too. For me as an athlete, you know, I do watch a few more movies, but I also find myself doing some different things that are much more enjoyable for me. In my off season, which for me will start in December after a cross country race that I'm getting ready for, so I'm actually pretty excited for that. Um, I find that that's when I'm going to spend more time going fly fishing. It's still a great time to fly fish here in Colorado, even though it's cold. The fish are still biting, but it's also a great time for me to tie flies, thinking about summer for when I can sneak out and get those things in. So, I give myself something that isn't always a sweat based activity. That might mean taking up like our coaches Hillary and Laura, both great art history people who have some great knowledge in the arts. They find themselves quilting or doing something that's more akin to the mental side, right? Flexing that other side of your brain instead of just the mental one. So I encourage you guys that if you don't have something that you can do to keep your hands busy or your mind busy, find one, right? That might be something like taking a pottery class, taking up photography, finding something else to, give yourself a break and not always just look at your one outlet as your sport. So this is about creating more outlets. So number one is, truly giving yourself the time. The second is creating an outlet to use that extra energy that you have, hopefully in a non-physical way, but if you need to, finding another sport. And then really number three here is giving yourself the permission to take a break. Now, I realize how woo-woo that sounds, but I can't tell you how many people have struggled with taking time off, backing that down, and watching their CTL, come down and watch it sink and sink and sink. And here's what I want you guys to understand is that as we're training for an event, we're climbing a mountain, right? And this is where the idea of hitting your peak, you want to hit that peak at just the right time. Hopefully it's sunrise, right? And you want to peak, but you have to remember that to get to that next peak, you don't just jump from mountaintop to mountaintop. You got to come down the mountain so you can go to the next mountain and climb up that. And hopefully it's a higher and taller mountain. And each time you're seeing new things, right? So I really need you guys to understand that we're not just traversing a ridge the whole time that we're training, right? We can't stay high forever. You have to go back down. And when you go back down, that's when you are able to get back new fitness. So with that said, I do want to hop in for questions. And while I'm hopping into those, I know we have some strength training questions and a few other things here. I think this is such a great time to assess yourself. When you're entering your off season, athletes tend to just, go right to where they're comfortable and just keep a lower mileage, whether that's on the bike, in the pool, or on the run. You can't just lower your numbers. and effectively you are detraining yourself. So we have to find some balance within that. And so the balance that I'm going to encourage you guys to find with this is finding where you're out of balance. And that may be changing your relationship with the sport, but this also might be a great way for you to assess yourself in terms of injuries, strength and conditioning, and a number of other places. So think about that as I answer these next couple questions. So, from Ruth Atkinson in our group, if someone had been only doing bodyweight movements and band work, and they were to walk into a gym and not know where to start or what moves to do with weights, what would you tell them? This is a phenomenal, phenomenal question, Ruth. One, I will encourage you guys to check out our Robust Runner program. It is specifically designed for runners, but Coach Laura as well as Coach Hillary have some really amazing Train Heroic programs, which if you haven't used the Train Heroic app, it's a phenomenal way to see just what we're talking about here. Each movement has a video that goes along with it. If it's not a movement that's in the library there, we make it so that you guys know exactly what your coach is looking for. With that said, I think there's so many basic movements that athletes need to understand, and I think the first thing they want to do is get under a barbell and go and do some squats. And while squats aren't bad, it's about getting the movement right first. So I would start with something as simple as just doing some basic goblet squats. So two-footed movements. You've got squats moving into things like lunges and other things that are really going to help work your glutes, your hips, quads. And then trying to progress into more single leg movements. So these could be things like Bulgarian split squats. This could be, doing a single leg deadlift. And this isn't heavy, heavy weights. A lot of this is getting hip mobility and increasing hip extension. So where to start, Ruth? What I would tell you is, define, 6 to 9 movements that you will go into the gym and do every single week, right? And I encourage you guys to say 3 of those are lower body, 3 of those are upper body, and then 3 can be either auxiliary movements, so things that might be a compound movement, or maybe learning a new movement in there. So, for instance, if you want to learn how to do a hang clean, that's a great auxiliary movement to learn. It is a good, powerful movement, but it's not just hips, it's not just upper body, but then also making sure that you're leveraging your core. With that said, so then where does the band work, and where does the other pieces of this fall into place? Well, those could be part of those auxiliary movements. You might do one session in a week that has a lot of core. You may have another session each week that's focused on doing lateral band work, or doing just lateral movements. And this is where having a guide and having someone to help you define that strength training is so, so helpful. This is truly where personal training comes into the picture, and it's a great time to do it in the off season. But where to start? I would start with working on the major movers. If you have known to have injuries in the past, if that's a hip injury, if that's lower legs, you're going to want to do things to address that first to kind of get the whole body up to speed. So with that said, Ruth, I'll also tell you that with doing body weight movement and then going and adding additional weight on top of body weight, you're going to be sore. You're just going to be, using different muscles at a higher level of strain. So it's pretty important to make sure that you also factor that into your running. So with increased weight training means that you should also probably lower your mileage. That's why it's so good to do that during the off season. You don't have to worry about how is that strength training session going to impact my workout positively or negatively. We're looking at the long-term benefits here. So hope that was helpful, Ruth. I can always answer more and more of those questions. What I do know is both Laura and Hillary are phenomenal to ask those questions. And perhaps we'll have to have them on here soon to talk just about off-season strength. All right, from Miss Leslie, who wonderfully doted upon me. One of the things that she shared was how hard it was for her to take an initial off season. I think that this is where most athletes struggle. when it comes to their first season with a coach. Especially looking at 2020, I have a lot of athletes that are going to be entering a season that may or may not have had a race in it. And there doesn't seem like there's any finality to a season. And so now we're moving from a moderate to high level of training to now a low level of training. And I can assure you that more than one of them is asking, okay, what's the value of really having a coach? And why do I have to lower my volume? And if you're just joining, go listen to the earlier part of this. We talk a little bit about the importance of taking some lower volume days, weeks, and months so that you can absorb the training from both a mental and physical perspective. I think in a lot of ways, I have to sell athletes on the idea of an off season as the valley part of their next mountain climb. Um, trying to ridge run from season to season just doesn't work. You probably need to stop at some point and assess. And that was really the big thing that Leslie and I had to do. She came to me hoping to PR in Chicago. We didn't get a Chicago this year. And what I've encouraged her to do is kind of explore some different opportunities that exist where she lives. She lives in Hilton Head, South Carolina. So yoga, Pilates, strength training, group classes, even in a time of COVID, those things are still going on. And when you're comfortable reintroducing yourself to that dynamic, even if you have to wear a mask, I can promise you that getting back to working out with people as soon as you feel comfortable is one of the greatest things you can do for your off season. It means that you're going to feel committed to a group. It's going to give you the accountability that you really need there. So, what I will say with that is the biggest and best thing you can do is actually lean harder onto your coach and use the resources that exist out there. If there's something that you want to take on as a challenge, whether that's just a strength training, class that you want to be a part of, set some goals within that, right? Do you want to get your squat up to body weight? Do you want to be able to do 10 box jumps? What are some of these things that you want to set for yourself as a goal? It's no different. You can still have goals in the off season. Don't lose sight of the fact that you can't be that when you have an off season, it means that all the goals are off the table and it's just this aimless wandering. No, absolutely not. You need to give yourself some goals, but change what the performance indicator is, right? How do you know you've had a good workout, right? How do you know, if you're making progress? Well, take some time, take a rest day or two within there, and go see if you can hit new PRs in your squat, in your deadlift. What are some of those things that you can do for yourself? And so it's about giving yourself new performance metrics to hit, right? Being goal oriented doesn't have to be exhausting, but if that's the mental part of it that is killing you when you're in season, all right, then change what you're looking for there, right? Instead of going for a certain number and squats and pounds and all that stuff, just go for setting yourself a standard, right? Does that mean 3 days a week of running, no matter what it is? And it doesn't have to be hard. Is it trying to get in 2 days of strength training? Or one of your days is cycling or trying a new class, right? Using resources like ClassPass, and other things are a great way to experience new classes and experience some new things. So, with that said, I know this is a shorter version of our usual office hours, but I wanted to just make this short and sweet and really loaded with a few things here. As you guys are maybe struggling to see the light at the end of the tunnel after a really tough COVID season, remind yourself that under times of more stress, our bodies don't just adapt, they tend to break. And with all that's going on, what used to be a big week for you in terms of mileage, say it's 50 miles a week, you might feel like you're running 50 miles a week at 35 miles a week. And this off season may be the lowest and least that you've experienced, but you have a lot of stress around you. And that's something to be super conscious of. We're also in an election season, and I know many, many of you are watching this very closely. And there are many big decisions that are being made. And not to get political here by any means, but that does add stress into your life. So, what I will encourage all of you to do is be kind to yourselves, be conscious of how much you're putting on your own plate, and make sure that you leave some time there for yourself. With that said, we'll see you guys in a week. Thank you guys for joining for a home office version of office hours here today. I always appreciate seeing who's out there and who enjoys these. So I will leave you guys with this. Um, I would love to see from you guys on this post, as well as the post that's in the group, what you guys are going to commit to for your off season. What commitment are you going to make to yourself? That's my ask of you. Are you going to commit to a certain mileage per week? Are you going to commit to a certain number of workouts per week? What are you going to stay committed to? And how can you do that, right? It's not just saying I'm going to do X, but how are you going to accomplish it? So, with that said, I'd love to see a few comments for you that get all the way to the end here. I appreciate it. Signing off for Wednesday. We'll see you guys later.